Hello and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Jo Wheatley, and my friend and co-host Zoe Hawkins.
Hi, everybody. We're here this week to talk to you about co regulation and coaching. It's a really important part of coaching. It's a skill that you can hone and develop to support your coachees through the coaching relationship. So, we're going to share a little bit about that with you today. So, do you want to kick us off, Jo, with talking a bit more about what co regulation is?
Yeah, co-regulation um, is really about being able to be with somebody else's energy. So we're not looking to um, fix somebody else's energy, but it's really about getting attuned to the other person. So when you're in company with somebody else in a coaching situation, the co-regulation is that process of where the nervous system of the coach and the nervous system of the coachee start to attune to one another. So you will, as the coach, will sense into your coachee's, um, nervous system, how they're arriving in the coaching session, and what are their needs. So that approximately is about being able to develop that psychological, physiological, and emotional safety in the conversation together. And today we're going to talk about how do you do that and why it's so important.
Yeah, and I think about co regulation as a way to it's a way to build rapport. So there's something quite silent, I think, about the energy in a coaching space where you know if you are, or I know if I speak from my own experience, I know if I am being received well, if I am welcome in that space, if I can show up however I choose to be, that I don't need to prepare, for example, I don't need to adjust. And I think when you're met in that welcome energy in the ability to be able to co-regulate, I think what it says is you're okay and I'm okay. Like however you show up to this session is okay with me. And I think there's a really strong silent rapport that is built through mastering um, the energetics of the relationship.
Yeah, and I think what we're talking to here is sometimes there can be an overemphasis in coaching around words. We focus on, questions, we focus on listening to the words and so on. When we're talking about co-regulation, what we're really starting to do is tap more into how people feel in their bodies. So you as the coach being able to do that and also supporting the coachee to be able to get into their body and to be able to tap into that as well. So that psychological safety, that is a term that is often used, is actually something that we feel in our body. And so when we're talking about co-regulation, we're talking about the nervous systems co-regulating together. We are talking about a physical experience as well as a psychological experience. And I think
Yeah,
that
and sorry, Joe, you carry on.
I was just going to say that the reason that it's important to be aware of co-regulation and to really tune into that, as a coach and think about that when you are coaching is because if you've got a coachee that comes to a coaching session and let's say perhaps they've come from a meeting where they feel dysregulated. They might not know that they're feeling dysregulated, but they might be dysregulated. Or maybe they have been going through some stuff in their life that has even drip, drip, drip kind of created a sense of dysregulation. That person then might not be able, from that dysregulated state or heightened state of arousal, they might not be able to really access the most of their own insight from coaching. They might not be able to tap into um their creative ideas and really stretch out, if you like, and explore the potential that a coaching session can offer them. And so spending some time supporting your coachee to understand how are they feeling in their body, what is happening in their nervous system, their readiness for coaching, and you using yourself as a tool to help them to regulate themselves, to set themselves up for success in that coaching session. It's really a fundamental part of enabling coachees to get the most out of a coaching conversation.
Yeah, and I think we've talked before around like meeting your client where they're at and
Mhm.
matching energy. And I think I may have told a story before where I had a number of new coachees to onboard in a day. And the first three happened to be quite high energy coachees. And then the fourth client that I was meeting that day was quite was a lower energy. And I remember bounding into that session with a high energy to be met with the client who was quite low energy and needing to do quite a quick pivot to regulate myself to be able to meet my client. And I think co-regulation, there's always choices to be made. Because just because somebody is showing up in a high energy, it doesn't mean that they are dysregulated. You know, there's like, what is their energy and what is dysregulation? And you're not always going to just know if somebody is or isn't dysregulated. Like a display of emotion, for example, doesn't mean that the client is dysregulated. It can mean all sorts of different things. And I think as a coach, understanding and being able to receive energy like in your own body is one way that you can tell tell the difference, and that's quite a somatic experience. So for example, if I'm working with a client and I'm noticing that they are talking very fast and their pace is you know rapid and it's moving around and they are um, maybe dropping words and just having an excitable energy, if you like. I suppose in my coaching I've got to a point where I can tune into that to feel into how that is for me in my body, and almost checking out like, does that feel like that's regulated or not regulated? Now the easiest way to do any of that is to actually ask your client to pay an observation around, oh, I'm noticing you've quickened your pace and I'm receiving that as an excited energy. Well, like, what's happening for you right now? Because you've got an option to match it and join in with what you might perceive as excitement, or to slow your breathing, to calm yourself down, to invite the client to step into a relaxed space. And you're not necessarily always going to know which one would be more helpful to the client. The important part is being able to notice it, receive it in your own body, and invite the client to check in with themselves around that, how their energy is.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, our nervous system, so us as human beings, we're wired for connection. Like we seek connection, and coaching is a very intimate connection, or there is the opportunity to have a very intimate connection with another human being around what it is to be human. And for people that like the science, lots of people now are familiar with polyvagal theory, which will talk more about what that is. And co regulation is really an opportunity for us as coaches to act as anchors um, from a somatic, a co-regulation perspective. So we can act as that neurobiological anchor. So we can bring the regulated, grounded energy into that space, which can be almost like like a desert island, like an oasis for our coachees that sometimes aren't experiencing that very much outside of the coaching space. And actually, what some people need is that reset, like almost like a physiological reset that they can experience in the coaching space. So, coaches that are listening, you might find that your clients often say to you, "Oh, you're always so calm," or "Oh, I wish I could have you in in my head. I have your words in my head." There is a connectedness, an interconnectedness between the coach and the coachee, and coachees often seek that. And if you may have had experiences yourself, I know, I have, I can think of examples of where I might have been in a coaching session or even a conversation with somebody else who doesn't have that, isn't as attuned to this ability or need to co-regulate. And what can happen is that coachees, and I'm talking about an example, experiences I've had where you can almost perform. So you kind of operate at a surface level. It's a bit of lip service because you might not, your body may just not feel able to, for those of you watching, it's almost like you can see the shoulders go up. If you don't feel that the shoulders can relax and go down, and it's like you've arrived, this is a safe space for me, as you said earlier. So, like, I can just, speak my thoughts without having to check them before I say them. Like, this is a space where I feel I can genuinely open up, be myself, the unfiltered version of me, then that can stop coaching from having that transformational impact, if that is what the coachee is thinking about. So that's another reason why it's important to really understand and to think about, firstly, before you go into a coaching session, how regulated am I as the coach? You know, what's happening for me? What am I noticing in my body? How do I anchor into the coach version of me before I go into, like, metaphorically go into that coaching space? So perhaps we'll talk through some ways that we can um, create that or nurture that co-regulation in the coaching space.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is to know that you don't have to live your life regulated all the time in order to show up in coaching. And that may be obvious for some people, but I think there is this expectation that somehow coaches are superhuman and they walk around their whole life in this very sort of together place. It doesn't mean that as a coach, you can never have anything going on in your life. Like life happens to everybody, regardless of, what career you're in. And I think what you're alluding to there, Joe, is like when you show up for your clients, it is important that you're able to ground yourself and regulate yourself so that you bring in almost a cleansed energy into the coaching space. I was going to say calm energy, but I go back to that point that actually not all clients want a calm energy. You know, not being calm because there's lots of different levels of energy, isn't there? It doesn't mean that's a sign of dysregulation. So you may have a client who welcomes actually an animated energy from their coach because that helps to inspire them and it helps to generate ideas. So I think it's about bringing in a clean energy. And what I mean by that is that you aren't bringing into that coaching space perhaps the frantic or stress perhaps that you may have had in the morning, or you aren't bringing in the energy of confusion and frustration because of something that's going on in your world. You're able to settle yourself in the here and now and drop into presence, and really focus on service, I think, and being there for the client that you're holding space for. And when you do that, you can go and pick back up your life when you finish your coaching sessions and step back out and do what you need to do with your own emotional state. But it's a real skill, I think, to be able to center yourself and ground yourself in the service of your clients.
I think what's coming to my mind is, I think it's about being able to, for me to be able to um, coach from this kind of regulated, calm space as like a source. So being able to return to that. So of course, conversations go through different energies often, while you're coaching, there'll be times when the client might feel a bit stuck. There might be times when the client's getting super excited. We might be laughing at something at a certain point, or we might be deeply reflecting on things. So, we go through different energies in any coaching conversation, but my source energy is one of calm, present collectedness, and that's a place that I can return to. And I think within that, coachees can experience that kind of those efforts towards offering co-regulation as an offering of safety, whilst they can still be themselves, still have autonomy in what we do in the session and what they do outside of it and how they choose to be. But it is a place that they can borrow from in a way. And so I think that's, we often talk about the container, don't we? Or, it's kind of like a space to be able to hold or create that for them. So how can you almost accelerate then, if you like, the co-regulation? Because that's another thing that I think coaching can do is a client might have a desire to kind of get back to their felt sense of being well resourced, and coaching can accelerate that process. It's not all about these other goals about getting a promotion or whatever. So I think the way that we use our voices are instruments really as coaches. And I mean, I can't sing for for love nor money, but I can as a coach use my voice I'm conscious of the tone of my voice. I'm conscious of the pace of my voice. Um, and I know how effective that can be to infuse conversations and offer invitations. So the way we use our voice is as a tool of co-regulation.
I think breathing is another
Mhm.
tool that we use, and this is one that I think can play across the energy. So where you talk about calm is your source, I think about breathing as one of my sort of baselines, if you like. Like I can do animated, excited energy and laughter and challenge from a place of steady, slow breathing. And maybe that's how I remain grounded in a session, and I remain in my place, but definitely through noticing how am I as the coach breathing, and what is therefore that almost pace that I'm putting out from my own energy. Like if I'm breathing in a slow and steady fashion, I know that I'm putting out a calm energy regardless of where I am in the conversation. If my breathing is quickening, I'm probably stepping out of being centered. And that's a personal thing, you know. So I think the invitation to you listening is like, what does your breathing tell you about your energy and whether you are or aren't regulated? Because I think it's really important to know, what does regulation feel like in my body, to be able to offer co-regulation to a client, and spending time with yourself, noticing the different energetic states that you move through and are in, and what is welcomed and what is less welcomed. And that's important work. And I guess we're talking about reflective practice skills there, but I think it's purposeful reflection on what is the experience that I have in my body, particularly when I am showing up for clients. I find it very hard to be with a client if I am not steady. If I'm dysregulated, like that's a sign for me that I'm not gonna coach. I need to move it on, because if I'm not able to get into that energy, that I know is a problem for me. So it requires deeper reflection. It may not be the same for everybody. You know, we aren't here to judge whether you do or don't have different practices, but a block for me in being able to steady my energy would signify there's a deeper reason to not necessarily step into that coaching. Whereas when I can drop into that presence and I can steady my breathing and I feel welcome in my own body, I know that I'm well resourced to be able to show up for others.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about experience I had recently where I was being coached, and when I'm coachy, I'm often quite verbal. Um, I'm I'm in my kind of stream of consciousness, and I remember that the coach, using their body language, and it's so interesting to see a coach to be with a coachee being coached and see them do things that you do yourself, but you're getting to witness it. Like I'm trying to think of the word. You're sort of seeing different lenses or phases of the things you do. It can be really helpful. So always a reminder to get coaching yourself. But the I could see that the coach that had been listening to me, obviously I was bringing a certain energy, and I could see them trying to regulate themselves as a result of listening to what I was sharing. And then what they reflected back to me was, or offered back to me in a way, was this calmness, this purity, I think is one way that I would describe it. And it was such a contrast to the energy that I'd been bringing in what I was sharing, that it really sort of shifted me and helped me to get a new perspective, or like walk through another door.
Mm.
And body language is, when we talk about that and co-regulation, when you're offering that as an invitation to the other, it's important to be mindful. Do you have open body language? Do you have closed body language? Um, Eyes, like, are you making eye contact? Aren't you? What impact is that having on what's happening between you and the other person? So that self-awareness that we've been talking about, like starting with self first, knowing what's happening for you, is really important. And that's that the pace that we've been talking about, whether it's body language, whether it's your voice, whether it's your breathing, really it's about, I think most people have an idea of what it feels like when your nervous system is settled. Like for me, that's probably when I think about that, it's me lying on a beach, nobody else around. Actually, back is touching, the sand or the pebbles. Feet are firmly on the floor. I've got the sound of the waves that I find very regulating. So, there is a base point, and you might just suddenly feel your body sort of, oh, it's like something kind of can give way. So that feeling of settled. So when you're a coach, I think using silence can help to regulate or invite that co-regulation with the other person, because it creates that space for the person, as I say, to you, almost holding the mirror up for the person to kind of notice, oh, how have I arrived? Like, what's happening for me? But when the client is silent, sometimes they're silent because they are reflecting. Sometimes the client is silent because they're overwhelmed and their nervous system is flooded. It's heavy. They feel that they can't kind of lift up and go through it. And that might be an indication for you as the coach that rather than more questions, maybe the time here is about helping them to, is that process, that co-creation, that co-regulation.
Mm. Co-regulation in itself is really powerful. We talk a lot about coaching on this podcast and give lots of different hints and tips. But for some people, this is the most transformational part of coaching, is to be received by another human being for all that they are without words. And that may be a new experience, and it may help them to actually get in touch with their own body. When you can enter into a space, particularly if there's lots of places where you may experience dysregulation outside of the coaching space, and when you can enter into it and find a place in your mind and in your body and in your energy where you can be calm, you can begin to think, oh, this is possible. I want more of that. Like, how can I achieve that when I'm in these other environments and in these other places? So it's not to be underestimated how powerful co-regulation can be as in itself as a skill in coaching, without needing to do all the other things that come to coaching. And I think if you're still wondering, like, well, what's a really simple way then that I can help a client to co-regulate in the coaching space, is to invite them into a breathing activity or a grounding activity. I remember a time, it was back in lockdown and life was a little bit crazy in our house at the time, and it was a supervision session, but a similar essence. And I showed up to the session and I was completely dysregulated. I'd probably even been crying like just before that, because I was right on the edge of what I had capacity for. And immediately the lady I was working with sensed into that, and she says, how are you arriving? And I was like, I don't even know. She's like, well, shall we start there? And she invited me into a very short breathing activity. It probably only took 2 minutes, but it felt like, I think you used the word, an oasis. It
Mm,
felt like an oasis.
mm.
And it just really helped me to just settle and step into that with the clarity of mind. So, really inviting your clients into that. And to be honest, they don't have to be dysregulated for you to do that. That can be a great way to just enter into spaces together, is to just take a pause, take a moment. And what you're really doing in that pause is co regulating so that you get in step with each other.
I think what I'm hearing more and more is how coaches are using or borrowing activities from other spheres or modalities. And for example, like beginning a coaching session with a grounding exercise, a breathing activity, or something to signal that to help the client or the coachee to understand that they are moving into a different space. Now, I was doing coaching supervision recently. It was a small group, so it's just two people. I knew that they were in the work environment, so they were in a separate meeting room. But I was immediately in my mind, whilst I haven't worked in the organization, I could sense all of the organization behind them. I just had, there were not even any words. And I just went straight um into like a grounding activity basically. And it was only probably 2 or 3 minutes because I was sensing into what was happening energetically while I was going through it as to when shall I bring it to a close? Shall I extend it? And as I brought it to a close, both of the individuals, they felt and they expressed to me how their nervous systems had just gone, oh, they were like, oh, they were like, oh, that was really nice. That was just what we needed. And it's what's so lovely is like the appreciation, there's the valuing of that. It's not the hard, sometimes coaches overwork, I think, in terms of coaching. And so that ritual, if you like, if we want to give that term to it at the start of a session, can be really valuable. Now, I'm not a great one for breathing activities. So if I'm invited into a breathing activity, I'm a bit like, oh, when will it be over? But I enjoy a body scan or whatever. So again, with your client, when you're doing your contracting with them or getting to know each other in those early stages, discussions around those kind of things and what they would find helpful can be useful. So can the somatic check-ins. So the questions or references, like inviting clients to notice what they're feeling in their body, their felt sense at different points in a conversation can be really helpful. And it's easy to miss that as a coach unless it's something that you develop as a habit, as part of your practice. And what helps you as a coach to be off of that co-regulation, as we've talked about yourself, but supervision, it's a really important place to be able to check in. And what are you checking in with to help you to be able to co-regulate or offer co-regulation in your coaching sessions is what are your own nervous system patterns? What are you noticing in your coaching practice through that lens? Where might you get triggered? What is your own self-care practice, inside and outside of the coaching sessions? So really, being mindful as well around, our clients, a lot of clients will have experienced trauma. And so when we're talking about co-regulation, we also need to be mindful of that aspect, being trauma informed as coaching practitioners too in this space.
So hopefully today you have got a few little
So,
nuggets of what you'd like to take into your coaching practice. And if you're listening to this podcast, it's clear that you love learning. And that's great news because we have our coaching summit coming up on the 29th of July. And this year we've put a theme around the coaching summit where you can come and learn more about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So we would love to welcome you curious coaches and aspiring coaches along to that summit to learn more and find out what new pieces of information you can take away and apply to your life and your coaching practice. So come and sign up to that summit at igcompany.co.uk/summit25.